Hi everyone, Geek Ella here. Today is day 6 of World Watercolor Month. We are painting the theme hat with the color Deep Scarlet. So if you want to watch me paint this little forest mushroom scene, stay tuned. So I went ahead and sketched out my idea for today. My reference picture I'm using is this mushroom, so thinking of the mushroom's red cap as its hat, and we're gonna paint that. And I just kind of sketched my foreground. My background, I'm just gonna kind of do loose earth tones. I did recently rearrange my palette into a little bit of a smaller intersection of my larger palette. So working on first time, we'll see if I have a hard time finding colors. And I did already go ahead and mix up that Deep Scarlet, and I do have some colors mixed up from the previous days, some burnt umber, some of that deep green gold. So we might try to use some colors from the previous days since those are already here in my palette. I'm gonna start with, I think this is like a size 8 round brush, and just start going in and painting some of my lighter values. I did also just pick up this Daniel Smith Jean 1, which I think might be a nice color, maybe mixed with Lunar Earth, to get some of the kind of brown of the kind of stalk stem of the mushroom cap. Now this one's going to be a little challenging for me to paint. I'm not used to painting white subjects, so we'll see. I have experimented a little bit with masking fluid in the past. I wasn't a big fan of using it. I'd like to maybe explore using it more in the future, but we don't have any today. I'm just gonna lift out a little bit of highlight right here and maybe kind of in the middle. And while this is wet, I'm just gonna drop in some of those shadow colors just so we get a nice blend on those. And I did do my outline with just a watercolor pencil. So these pencil lines should kind of just eventually melt into our painting. And then I think for the actual stalk, I'm just gonna go in with a very, very light wash. Maybe lift out some highlights and add some shadow. And then see if I can just, with my tissue, lift out a little bit of shadow. And we're not going to go for ultra realism here. I tend to try to paint in a kind of mixture between representational and abstract. So I am totally fine with this not being extremely photorealistic. Yeah, I feel like this would be a perfect time to use some masking fluid if I had some, but I do not. We could kind of make this even a little cartoony and leave white space that is a little bit more intentional versus like random spots. I kind of like doing these brush strokes and just leaving gaps. So we're gonna do that. And they do get very small here on this like bottom layer of the mushroom. So I'll try to capture that. I'm not sure how I feel about my mushroom. I think we need to loosen up some of these lines, and we'll do that with little spritz. I already like that a lot better. I don't want the lines to look so forced. If I had masking fluid, I'd want to just like flick it on in random places so we get that very kind of organic feel. Let's see if I can lift out just like a few tiny spots. All right. Looks good. I left a little bit of a gap here. I don't know why I did that. I think that's supposed to be kind of like my dark red along the bottom. I'm just kind of going in with my palette, whatever was left over, and adding in some of that dark, I think it was a burnt umber, dark brown. And I'm just going to bring that up in a few places and maybe lift out, just dabbing this very lightly. Some highlight area right there. And then I think I'm just going to tap in more scarlet around some places. We might have lost some of our white, but I might cheat and bring that back at the ends with some white paint or something. I think some like splattered white paint might look really cool. So there's the beginnings of our mushroom. While that dries, I might work a little bit on the background. So I want my background to be kind of like out of focus, so we're not going to go very detailed in the background. I know that I want to have kind of some like tree shapes. Oh, I kind of like how that red's bleeding a little. That looks cool. And I'm just going to carry this paint down so that way we can drop in some color. Alright, so for our background in our reference picture, there's lots of brown there. I do really like the way that the lunar earth granulates, so we're going to use some of that, but it's a little bit lighter. So to darken the lunar earth, what if we used a little bit of lunar blue? I just refilled my lunar blue today. So we have a nice fresh pot of lunar blue, one of my personal favorite colors. And mixing our lunars is going to give us some granulation and some nice effects. hopefully we'll get some separation and the paint will do some of the work for us. So we got this very kind of neutral brown, and we're going to drop that in for some of our kind of leaves and whatever suggestions here in the foreground. Negative paint a little bit around my mushroom. I'm just loosening up those shapes a little bit more with some water. And maybe we have a little bit of some leaves or something that kind of go over our mushroom. Mixing a little bit more of my lunar blue in to get an even darker neutral. So let's maybe go in with some dark kind of in here. And maybe we'll try to make like a very neutrally green as well. Just so we're kind of sticking with these more earthy neutral tones in our background. What if we take some of that rich green gold and mix a little lunar blue in there? It's actually a really nice green. It's the rich green gold mixed with the lunar blue. Let's get those moving a little bit. We don't want anything too rigid or defined in our background. We want the focus on our mushroom. And now I'm just going to mix some different ratios of some of the colors we've already used, just to get some variations within the same kind of color family. And I think we need a lot of this to dry before we really go in and move on with our second layer. So I'm going to wait for this to dry, and then I will come back with a second layer. All right, my painting is mostly dry, a little bit damp at the top, but mostly dry, and we're gonna go in and add in the details to make this look a little bit more like a mushroom. And just gonna go in with some negative painting all around the mushroom. My paint might be a little bit of a too thin consistency. Might need to thicken it up, but we'll see how this dries. I always think it's better to go in with too thin and light of a layer and then add another layer than to go too thick and need to, you know, try to lift or take something out. And just with some of the colors I already had mixed in my palette, just gonna go in and add in some darkening of these tree-ish shapes. And this was the rich green gold mixed with the lunar blue to get kind of this very dark earthy green. And we're just going to use water to loosen up the edge of that and go in with just some lunar blue in the middle. And maybe we'll bring some of that pure lunar blue to some dark spots elsewhere in the painting, just so it's not all alone. And then just adding some other colors to kind of make this, you know, very just kind of abstract foliage in the background. Going in with a little bit of line here. We'll bring back some of that line going over into our mushroom. And then I think we need to work on the mushroom itself. I'm gonna switch to a smaller brush and kind of just go carefully in with some details around some of these wet areas so we don't have to have a long drying time. And just going to darken and soften. Repeat that kind of process of darkening and softening. Getting some bleed, I don't mind because I don't, you know, it's all part of the kind of natural colorscape here. I'm gonna lift out just a little bit of the green that's bleeding, but I don't mind a little if there is a little bit of green. All right, now we're going to kind of add in some shadows on our mushroom cap. All along the bottom, that's pretty dark. And shadow's gonna kind of go up this way a little bit. And again, I'm not super concerned with bleeding. I like the colors to kind of run together a little bit and kind of have some of that green coming in here. I generally like it. Maybe we'll go in and add a little bit of the red to kind of target where we want that. I just noticed how much that green crept in. Going back with our main color, which was the Scarlet Red, or sorry, Deep Scarlet. Get my color names mixed up. And I might need to mix up a little bit more. Trying to preserve some white space, but we are definitely going to, I think I decided while it was drying, gonna go in with a little white paint spatter here. And just continue kind of tapping that in, brightening up my red. I lost a lot of the white in the middle, but not overly concerned. We're gonna cheat and add some back. I feel like we do have a lot of dark values, so I'm trying to decide how we can preserve some lights. And then continued with some foreground grasses and such. Maybe just with this semi, well, a little more opaque Jaune Brilliant, go in and give my mushroom some texture here. I'm not totally in love with the background, but that is okay. We can fix what we can and then learn to love the rest. I was kind of preserving that part as like a light, but there's really a nice dark next to it in the reference photo. So I think I'm gonna kind of add in like a dark there. It looks like the mushroom in the reference photo is kind of like torn a little bit there. So we'll make ours similar. You know, we're at the point where our reference photo is just a reference. We're not going photorealistic, but I do find it helpful to look at some of the shadows and lights and darks in a reference photo when you're feeling stuck. You can use it as that inspiration for, you know, what your painting might need to succeed. I kind of lost that pattern there of the top part of the mushroom. Now I'm trying to decide what I want to use as my white. I do have some white gouache, but it's not as vibrant. I do also like going in with this Posca marker, and I do also like using this as an agent of chaos and just shaking it. But first I'm going to go in with some of those areas we kind of already defined and just re-whiten them. And then this is what I said, agent of chaos, is using my Posca marker to just really go crazy, getting it very kind of juicy. And trying to add back in very just kind of chaotic spots, and we don't want them to look too planned, like we did any sort of pattern. We want it to look like nature. And I might use a paintbrush to kind of take some of these spots and blend in that white a little bit. If I just take my paintbrush and kind of take that white highlight and smooth it in. Same thing with that one, just making it part of the painting. I've got a little too white in there. I'm just gonna try to blend this acrylic paint. And then it's not always the brightest white. It does kind of fade a little bit. So I'm just gonna kind of go back over some of the spots where it faded. You know, not fuss too much, not overwork it, but what does it need to look somewhat complete? Spent about 30 minutes on this, trying to do these little World Watercolor Month paintings in 30 minutes or less. Really, I just want the mushroom to stand out a little more. I'm just trying to go around it and really highlight, but not make it look too like outlined. I use shadow, not really highlight. I don't want it to look, you know, just like an outline, but I do want it to feel a little bit more dark in some of these background areas. So added our dark and then blending it out. And then just gonna try to add in some texture to some of these tree shapes by kind of negative painting with my lunar blue. Maybe fading a little bit of it. I don't know. Does that look too controlled? I don't want to overwork it, but I want it to look dark in the places I want it to look dark. Sometimes that's the hard part about using a granulating watercolor, is I do feel like it can, you know, turn out a little lighter than you wanted. What I don't feel like I was as successful with is kind of keeping my background from being too overworked and messy. I'm just going to try to see if I can bring back a little bit of highlight into my mushroom without it looking washed out. We added a couple little highlights. He's fine. We'll leave him as is. We'll go ahead and peel the tape as it's pretty much almost fully dry. And here is day 6, which the theme of this is hat. So we have our little hat or our mushroom, and the color is Deep Scarlet, which we mixed our own version by doing the Pyrrole Scarlet and a little drop of the Quinacridone Magenta. I hope you enjoyed painting this little mushroom with me. Thanks for watching.